2 months before this motion was stemmed, tens of thousands marched into Nefri with one demand: limit the tourists. Their banners did not say manage us better. They said this is not tourism, it's colonization. When the tourist photograph and the residents' home collide, we protect the home and we protect the place itself. The people who live there are asking for the cap. We are the side that listens. Let me introduce you to our model. There's a diverse range of measures in our world: hard caps, fines, and taxes. We are limiting tourist infrastructure, allowing only few hotels and limiting some spaces that should be preserved. Crucially, prohibiting licenses for multinational chains to build hotels and resorts, because MNCs are the catalyst for excess tourism through convenience and brand name. The counterfactual that we provide is that when caps are imposed, travelers explore other destinations because the demand is for a vacation in general, so they spread for smaller sites. Let me introduce you to now our first argument: harms to local populations. When too many tourists visit a place, the people who actually live there suffer in several major ways. Firstly, concentrating tourists demands prices for locals to get out of their lives. High purchasing power drives up prices, so locals living there can no longer afford rent, food, or basics. This causes straightforward displacement, destroying close-knit communities. Second, concentrating demand affects MNCs like big hotel chains. They buy large land, high property prices, and driving small local businesses out of town. And these chains often exploit culture with fake commercialized performances. And third, MNCs underpay, automate, and destabilize jobs. A dominant chain becomes the sole buyer of labor and suppresses wages. They automate roles to cut costs, leaving unstable seasonal jobs that offer no income during quiet months, forcing remaining shops to hike prices even further to survive. Last impact here is that there's over-reliance on tourism that limits the future of local use. When an economy relies solely on tourism, young people living there feel trapped into working only in hotels or restaurants, aiming to be servers rather than scientists, doctors, or engineers. However, our world focuses the economy to diversify, opening up broader career paths for the kids in the local communities. There's also another impact that the licensing ban keeps money where the people care. By banning licenses from multinational hotels, this remains tourism that must run through locally owned businesses. We finished our first argument. Is there any POIs? Three,
Yes.
2, 1. Then I'll move on to our second argument, which is about preserving environment and culture. Yes, do you have your POI?
Yes. How does cutting demand for tourism improve the lives of the locals?
Okay, we said it multiple times that if lots of visitors come here, there will be much more MNCs and much more industries that are trying to invest in this kind of tourism. If these are very more popular because of their huge financial power, then the locals living in there, the visitors, not the visitors, but the people that usually try to make money there, will be displaced by the bigger industries. Moving on to our second argument, we're talking about preserving environment and culture. Too many visitors can permanently ruin the beautiful places that they come to see. First, damage is inherent to visitation, not the bad behavior. Massive crowds accidentally break structures that are important. Because every well-behaved visitor still causes micro damages, the only available variable that actually prevents destruction is limiting the number of bodies. Second, regulation collapses at scale. A few rangers cannot oversee thousands of tourists, so governments with short-term profit incentives refuse to install the aggressive barriers. Third, and MNCs prioritize profit over nature. Large chains take cheap shortcuts that wreck the environment, such as piping hotel sewage straight into the ocean. Then how did they escape with this crime? They simply use their wealth and power to lobby governments. Last but not least, the destruction is frequently irreversible. For instance, careless boating ruins coral reefs that took thousands of years to go. Environmental damage is very hard to reverse. Therefore, I proudly propose. Thank you.
Tourism has funded thousands of people so far. To restrict the amount of tourists is to erase entire industries and all the lives contingent to its economy. More than proud to oppose. First on setup, this debate is on where tourism is contingent to revenue, as we are debating upon major tourist destinations. Additionally, not limiting the number of tourists under our world does not mean that we don't support restrictions. We will implement restrictions such as rent controls that cushion local inflation in France. Few rebuttals then. One, arguments on locals like these seasonal jobs. These jobs still exist even if it's not seasonal times. Just because it are seasonal jobs just in summer, winter? No, it also includes spring and fall, and these jobs are also during the season too. And thus, since these tourist spots are so popular, there's still visitors that visit them even not during peak times, and say that even if they're a bad season, we will assume that they still make enough revenue from these peak seasons because they pay a lot. Moving on to our team's first argument, which is how tourism is indispensable to the economy. First,
DOI, sir.
no, thank you. High volume tourists help the economy for two reasons. First, they consume large amounts of goods and services and bring many job opportunities like hotels, transportation, and food. Therefore, tourists are the perfect target material. And second, multinational corporations and foreign investors inject money into these areas. The investment is used for welfare, other industries, etc. Second, there are two functioning regarding tourism in the economy. The first is on consumption. Large amounts of goods and services operate based on the tourist destinations. Hence, tourists consume a lot of the local goods and services, and therefore we earn money within the large tourist industry. When we limit the number of tourists, not only is there large revenue cut off, no, thank you. Not only is there large revenue cut off, but some of these services and goods are forced to close down or face drawbacks, especially the owners of these small businesses that rely on these tourist businesses. The second is on job opportunities. In these small areas, tourist markets are the easiest targets that can easily generate the most revenue. There are trickle-down impacts to this, like how general welfare programs attract people in other economies. Hence, the fundings earned from consumption within the major tourist destinations can be used to expand the economy and help citizens. Third, the transition to a new economy would be difficult and painful. Even in their best case, many of these economies have developed strong comparative advantages in tourism because their geographic limitations make it difficult to diversify into other industries. As a result, sectors such as hospitality and tourism dominate employment and economic activity. B, shifting away from this model will require extensive retraining of the local population, which would demand significant investment and capital. However, these economies often lack the financial resources to fund such a large-scale transition on their own. And C, in addition, domestic industries will be disrupted during the transition. Economic sectors do not operate in isolation. They're interconnected because many of these activities are outsourced or depend on one another. If the alternative economy is not yet fully developed, distributions in one sector can have ripple effects throughout the entire economy. Moving on to your team's second argument, which is tourism is instrumental in safeguarding tourist sites. Tourism is important in safeguarding tourist sites because it creates a self-sustaining process. Tourist destinations require steady source of income to maintain and improve their facilities. Without tourists, there is very little revenue available for renovations, maintenance, parking, and other essential services that visitors expect. As a result, the site becomes less attractive and gradually loses its appeal. When fewer people visit, less money is generated. Without sufficient revenue, tourist sites cannot invest in improvements or preserve their attractions. This creates a cycle that discourages even more visitors. Over time, what was once a major tourist destination can decline because there's simply not enough investment to keep it competitive. There are factors beyond human control that threaten tourist sites. Natural disasters can destroy attractions and infrastructure. Recovering from these disasters requires funding, and tourism provides the resources needed for restoration. Furthermore, tourism encourages people to care about and protect these areas. When local communities benefit economically from tourism, they have stronger incentive to preserve the environment and maintain the attractions that bring visitors, and for these reasons, more than proud to oppose.
Judge, as the DPM stage debate, before I start with my main rebuttals, I'm going to start with a few extension and third argument from our team. So in our third argument, we're going to prove that mass tourism transforms living cultures into products for outsiders. It changes how traditions are practiced, who controls them, and eventually prevents local communities from accessing places central to their own identity. So three mechanisms. A, culture becomes commercialized, sacred tradition becomes performative, and the cultural symbols lose their original meaning, and authenticity is replaced by what tourists actually want to see. And B, outsiders increasingly control how culture is presented. Foreign businesses package local culture with little understanding and leaving the community with little influence over how its own heritage is actually represented. And C, locals gradually lose access to culturally significant places. Sacred temples and historic neighborhoods and spiritual sites become tourist attractions where residents are crowded out of places that once belonged to them. For example, Kyoto restricted tourists from entering private alleys after residents experienced harassment and disruption. In Vengvyang, party tourism overrode local tradition and fundamentally changed community life. So why is this comparatively better on our side? Opposition argues tourism spreads culture, but culture does not need millions of visitors to remain valuable, right? It is more important that traditions remain authentic and accessible to the people they belong to to then become performance for outsiders. So this matters because culture cannot simply be rebuilt after it is lost. Protecting communities' identity, dignity, and connection to their heritage outweighs the marginal economic benefit of attracting more tourists. So now moving on to rebuttal. So first of all, the LO layered a lot of reasons why actually economy is better on their side, but I think this is not true for mainly about 4 reasons. So first of all, they talked about how like visitors, how like jobs and revenue will decrease, but however, we think that this is not true. Most of that revenue is captured by global hotel chains and booking platforms, not the locals on the ground. So the GDP line rises while the cleaner the driver and the price out family see little. We do not abolish tourism. We cap the multinational chains, so some same visitor money stays with locally owned businesses. We delete leakage and not livelihoods. So we actually help the locals, and however, on their side, they help the MUNs, which are all the super rich. And also, they talked about how like transition is really hard, and these places will just not just have no people at all. But however, this is not true. We never asked them to transition. This is a straw manning of our case. We keep tourism exactly where it is and cap the multinational chain licenses, so the ownership localizes while the industry stays. There's no transition gap because there's no transition. The boats, beaches, and guides are still working. And also they talked about like how their investment with like MNCs, but however, we cap new licenses at chronically overcrowded flagship sites, not foreign capital across the whole economy. Investment redirects in locally owned operators, and to the secondary regions, we are deliberately diverting and demand toward where there is real room to grow, right? Capital follows the visitor. We are moving the visitors and not banning the money that is coming in. And also, they talked about how like they talked about like regulation, how it is possible to regulate these kind of tourists, and so therefore there will be a better quality of life. But however, you cannot renovate away a packed of commuter train or a crushed public square, and you cannot redevelop a sacred monument or a 600-year-old cathedral without violating the very thing people came for. Management raising the budget to host more crowd. It does not reduce the crowd, and the crowd is the harm. Off-peak pricing just spreads the total load. It does not lower it. But however, let's say that all of it is not true, and the economy is actually better on their side. But however, they can never defend the actual quality of life for the locals. And the government actually has an incentive to care more about the locals. This is because we want a vulnerability, because these people are most likely very vulnerable. If they're actually privileged, then they would have no incentive to live in these kind of crowded places with like trash everywhere. So therefore, we want a vulnerability because the government has responsibility to help these vulnerable people. And also, the quality of life is actually downstream of macroeconomy. When macro and a local gains vanish, right? Except the framing, and it still breaks for them because the macroeconomy is the downstream of the asset. A bleached reef or a hollowed out historical center is permanent macroeconomic loss. You cannot run a tourism economy on a destination tourists have abandoned. We project the thing, the whole macro, a whole macro pictures rest on. So therefore, I'm so proud to propose.
Their policy strikes economies when they're vulnerable, putting them in a financial crisis. What we want to do is to help these economies. So I will support their argument. First of all, they talk about the harms to local populations. There's a few parts to how I'm going to respond to this. First of all, they want to diversify the economy, but we thought that the lives of individuals are dependent upon this macroeconomy, and this is better on opposition. What is this? They're under their world. Let's get marginally better for these locals, and let's get marginally better for these locals. But under our world, we tell you that because under our world, we tell you that we're able to protect these people because they're able to maintain what they've always been doing, maintain what they've maintain the tourist population that they've always been trained or always been doing so from the start of their birth, the start of their lives. They're capable to transition the part that they talk about they're capable of transitioning to an alternative economy is not really true because you need so much capital to do this. They don't show you where this is. Where is this capital coming from? In the long term, they're not actually going to have enough capital eventually because retrain the economy, retraining these people takes massive amount of capital already. I'll take it a little bit later. In the short term though, what are they going to do? The possibility of transitioning that is speculative, and people who don't have jobs is going to be powerless because they don't have enough capital. Before I move on to the next point, tourism saved you in 2008. Who did it save in 2020 when the plane stopped? Yeah, so basically, I'm actually going to tackle that point later on. So I'll answer PY later. So actually, their side doesn't prove what the transition looks like in the first place. They don't actually explain what this will look like under their setup or under any of their arguments. Then these economies, we tell you, already depend on the tourists, and this is a factual statement. The island have no alternative transition. They have no capacity to do this. The labor force already caters towards this local tourism, meaning that there's no possibility of actually existing. And
especially since it's impossible because of how the lands are structured, as I already told you from Ian's speech. The money does trickle down to locals because according like seasonal tourism, which I'll also like respond to their POI, offsets the cost of seasons. There are people during certain seasons, people go to vacations, right? And during certain times, people don't go to vacation, people go to vacations. But when they do go to vacation, there's going to be a huge influx of like economic boost. There's going to be so much capital. And during the time when they don't go to vacation because of COVID, because of other like reasons, then we're able to then they're still able to offset the cost because it's still going to be okay because they've had a lot of capital anyways. Industries already rely on fishing, like for example, and sometimes there's times where like fishing isn't always like going to be popular or like fishing isn't always successful. So it's also seasonal. There's no real difference. But additionally, the MNC's incentive in the first place is to want to profit as much as possible. What is this? Is to make tourism as sustainable as possible for the longest time. And the only way the MNC's profit is to preserve these sites. And so we talk about in speech of the place only because renovating and care for it. As long as there are people going there, they don't actually respond to this point, meaning that their second argument isn't really true. Then they talk about gentrification as well and like just how the cost of living it becomes a crisis because of MNCs. However, this is not cultural appropriation when the Hilton hires local dance groups because they're literally local. And a lot of MNC Western hotel groups don't charge less because usually the point is to have a luxurious hotel in the first place. Their point of overpricing is simply something that's unlikely empirically speaking. DPM talks about the quality of living for locals, but we talk about state policy or sufficient. For instance, Hawaii has a housing first project. The Pathway project allows them to access housing. Additionally, there's government lobbying because we're the home state. We choose. Individuals have the immense power to regulate these power in the first place. Then their point doesn't actually stand because if they really have such a hard time that they can benefit, they can actually lobby and actually protest. Third, on how cultural exchange is important. Visiting foreign countries and experiencing their cultures firsthand is able to promote multiculturalism by giving people a deeper and more accurate understanding of different ways of life. Rather than relying upon stereotypes or secondhand information, travelers can observe cultural tradition, customs, etc., and their authentic context while interacting directly with local people. These personal experiences foster empathy, appreciation, and respect for cultural diversity, making individuals more open-minded towards people from different backgrounds. In addition, many cultural heritage sites, museums, and historical landmarks offer guided tours and educational programs designed to educate visitors. Because countries have a strong incentive to attract tourists and preserve their cultural reputation, they invest in making these experiences as important and engaging as possible. As a result, interest tourism serves as an effective way to promote cross-cultural understanding and strengthen multicultural values. Therefore, I'm so proud to propose.
One. So the opposition talks about how high volume tourism brings much more revenue. We think this is not true because cruise ships only stop offering photos and pollute more than they add in the terms of benefits that they actually give to the local people and the environment that they are actually harming. So they also second they talk about how they will expand the economy. We think that when things like COVID-19 hit tourism places the most, to shift away from tourism reliance only makes practical sense to really stabilize these economies. So. Moving on to our first clash. So the first clash I want to talk about is which side actually creates a better economy. So the opposition repeatedly compares how they actually get more money from the tourists because more people are coming. We compare who actually captures the value. This difference decides the debate. Their response to our case is that tourism creates jobs, investments, and tax revenue. Their argument assumes that the threat to the site is underfunding, but the threat we've identified is the volume itself. The erosion, the dead coral, the degraded frescoes, and no amount of maintenance budget regrows a reef or unerodes our stone path. Funding the upkeep of a site you simultaneously wearing out is a treadmill. You pay more every year to slow a decline you're also causing. On reversibility, we win clearly. A defunded but intact site can be funded again later. A worn-out site can't be unworn. Their money keeps a destroyed thing on life support. Our limit keeps the thing itself. They ask where our money comes from, but we already told you that limiting tourists make the attraction more valuable. There's a more beautiful view. There's more cleaner streets because governments are always cleaning this constantly. There are more industries and that means that there's more competition between industry and tourists who actually want to come. But because we are restricting them, like only allowing a few people and only allowing a few industries, this makes our location very more valuable, and that means people want to come more. So even if you say that this is a wash, our side doesn't earn as much money as they do. As the opposition do, the government still will give the locals a better quality of life, which we think is the government's obligation and the really important thing in the debate. So the money they earn is not used to fund other industries, but to keep on reviving the dead to keep on providing the dining environment, which is pointless in the end because the money they earn is always going to be used to kind of keep surviving the debt environment. So look how they respond. First, they tell you that governments can regulate corporations. This is not an answer; it's a mitigation. Even if regulations work sometimes, it does not change the fact that multinational chains still extract profits, automate jobs, and suppress wages through monopoly power. Second, they say that tourism creates employment. Again, that is only a mitigation. We never claim tourism creates zero jobs. We prove those jobs are seasonal, unstable, and concentrated in corporations that can replace workers whenever profits fall. So notice that every one of these responses is merely a mitigation. Yes, tourism creates employment. Yes, government receives tax revenue. But none of these responses answer a central mechanism. Our argument has always been that multinational corporations capture a disproportionate share of these benefits through profit repatriation, market dominance, automation, and monopoly power. They never explain why these profits suddenly remain with local communities. Instead, they simply assert that because the money and the economy increases, everybody benefits. That is not comparative. Now compare both worlds. On their side, the economy may be larger, but wealth leaks overseas through multinational hotel chains and foreign investors. On our side, the tourism that remains operates primarily through locally owned businesses because of the licensing restriction. The economy may be smaller in a comparison, but significantly more of the tourist dollar remains within the community, which we think is really important. So, moving on to the second clash, which side actually perverts heritage and the environment? The opposition introduces a new claim. They argue that tourism funds conservation. This argument actually strengthens our case. Why? Because it assumes that attractions survive long enough to continue generating revenue. That is precisely what they fail to protect. Their response is essentially that tourism pays for maintenance. Maintenance is important, but maintenance cannot reverse damage caused by excessive visitors' numbers. Repairing a pathway does not undo erosion caused by millions of footsteps. Cleaning a reef does not restore coral destroyed by anchors and pollution. Replacing infrastructure does not recreate ecosystems that already collapsed. Their response, therefore, addresses consequences rather than the causes. Our policy directly reduces the cause itself. Now compare both models. Opposition preserves funding while preserving pressure creates the damage. We reduce the pressure while retaining tourism at sustainable levels. Remember, our model never abolishes tourism. We limit excessive tourism while protecting the environment that is irreversible, and that's why we win.
When locals of a small developing country heavily rely on tourism as an indispensable pillar of the economy, I think the aspect that must be altered is not the innocent tourists who came there to experience culture and actually consume the goods and services, rather benefiting the country, but labor rights. And we tell you that this is a very overgeneralized statement in the first place. If I was a person operating a local business linked and professionally related to the tourist industries, I would be happy to welcome large amounts of tourists visiting to experience our culture. By unnecessarily overreaching as a government overstating the effects of tourism, Gov is only interfering with the economy and tourist-dependent countries. So proud to propose. All of our rebuttals will be dealt within the relevant clashes, so I will move on to the clashes and deal with the reputations within them. Moving on to our first clash, which is which side better protects the tourism-dependent countries. Gulf claims they protect tourism-dependent countries by reducing local harms, environmental degradation, etc. However, we tell you, Josh, that these countries depend on tourism as the backbone of their economy. By significantly limiting tourists, they immediately reduce the demand for hotels, restaurants, transport, tour guides, and all of these small businesses. Largely associated with the tourist industries. This causes unemployment, lowers government revenue, and discourages foreign investment. Without sufficient revenue, we tell you that governments have fewer resources to fund welfare, infrastructure, conservation, and even future economic diversification. In contrast, our role protects tourism-dependent countries by preserving an industry that sustains their livelihoods while addressing the problems through targeted regulation rather than reducing these tourist numbers. Additionally, we tell you that Gulf characterizes tourism as something that harms these local communities, but we these communities are not past victims, and they are also the primary beneficiaries of the industry in the first place. The people most affected by limited tourists are not the wealthy foreign visitors, but these are local workers and small business owners whose incomes are directly tied to tourism. By shrinking demand, government removes the very opportunities that allow these communities to earn a living and improve their quality of life. They said the revenue generated by these companies in the tourist industries go to large companies, but we already tell you, Judge, that this ignores the thousands of local businesses that directly on tourist spending. Family-owned restaurants, street vendors, local guides, souvenir shops, taxi drivers, and homestays, etc. Even if a multinational corporation earns some profits, this does not negate the fact that substantial income still flows into these local communities, local businesses benefiting into fulls. Also, Gov assumes that communities are better off simply because they are fewer tourists. We told you that this is a false comparison at the end of the day, and when comparing the tourist industry with a limited tourist population and not so, it's merely a dichotomy. Communities need both a livable environment and economic security. And so moving on to the second clash, which is who protects the locals at the end of the day. Hawaii has the housing first project.
UI, please engage.
Yeah, sure.
The two biggest costs of any trip are the flight and the hotel. Which local pocket does a foreign airline and an American chain fill?
So when we talk about these airlines, I think it's actually filling like the airports, like the airport industries themselves, which who can actually earn money from these like tourists like actually entering the country, and that these the money generated by these airports who are like associated with the government can also go to the government, which like where they can later like contribute to like social welfare, etc. Continuing on, additionally, government lobbying is able to regulate the practices that government says is bad. At the end of the day, the locals of the home state chooses these policies. Individuals have immense power to regulate these powers and power in the first place. This then allows the local individuals to access equal job opportunities. These locals are also going to benefit under MNCs and companies because they have the incentive to have locals who therefore understand geographical locations and the most amount of access. Since they're geographically limited. Please acknowledge that there is no form of any mechanization on how these countries retransition into other economies, despite consistently talking about diversifying the economy, and they have no form of support for these locals. Their assertion does not let them get away with this without clear mechanizations. Tourism provides one of the few accessible avenues for upward mobility in many tourism-dependent regions, and individuals do not need advanced education or large amounts of capital to benefit. At the end of the day, they can become guides, artisans, transport providers, or like operate like family-run business and like local businesses. The government removes these opportunities simply by shrinking demand, making it harder for ordinary locals to improve their socio-economic status in this small developed country. And for these reasons, more than proud to oppose.
Two main issues in this debate. First issue, which is better protects tourism-dependent countries. Two parts in this issue. First of all, on environment. The MNC's incentive in the first place we talk about is that they want to profit as much as possible, right? Because I think this is something that already government concedes to anyways. So how do they profit as much as possible? Then we tell that then they have the incentive to make tour sites as sustainable as possible for the longest time, because the only way the MNC is able to profit is to preserve these sites. Then the environment is not really like a very big point here. We just take this point because they don't really respond to this. Then I think the more important part is about the economy of the nation itself, right? Because under both worlds, there's going to be seasonal tourism, there's going to be seasonal vacation, there's going to be certain seasons where people go to these tourist sites because school vacations, etc., etc. Their rule though limits people from going to these places because there's there's a cap on how many people can go there. Then they can't go because they can't go anytime else. This economy is just losing on they're just losing on the economic benefits that they could get. They consistently don't prove how the transition to diversified economy exists. They just assert this the entire time. They're like, oh, we can just transition to diversified economy. Without actually proving structural mechanisms of how this happens. In a world though, which is for sure, uproots the core of their economy for something speculative, which is that like the diversified economy, then we want the certainty of outcome because we prove that these major tourist sites are dependent upon the economy that like tourism provides, the capital that tourism provides, and that the tourism that exists on these major tourist sites is likely to be very stable and likely to just occur as much as possible because during each of these seasons it's going to occur. Then the second issue, which like better supports locals. Please acknowledge that there is no form of mechanization on how this country retransition to other economies. They have no form of support for these locals. Their assertion should not let them get away with this. Then what happens if they cannot retransition? These locals have no job to do. They have nothing they can do itself. Then we want the vulnerability weighing because these people are the vulnerable population in the first place. Then because they cannot retransition, or because they just don't prove how they're able to retransition, we tell that all their points are speculative. All their points are something that you cannot really buy at the end of the day. Because they don't respond to this point, I think that's a critical issue in their team, a critical issue in their case. Then obviously opposition win this debate. Thank you very much.
We did something opposition never did. We listened. We heard them say again and again about how we had no plan for how to get these tourist-dependent nations off of tourism. But that is gaslighting. We called out how COVID really brought home this need for diversity. Also, we told you that it's better to spread out the tourism. Don't just concentrate it in a few places. They never responded to this. This debate comes down to two main issues. Firstly, who actually cares more about the residents, aka the most vulnerable stakeholders? We protect the exact people this motion is about, residents on the metric of incidence, who captures the value rather than aggregate output. And displacement is close to irreversible. Once a community is priced out and scattered, it doesn't reassemble. What the opposition responded to our claims was only that people can actually succeed the competition. The opposition talks about economical harms for the residents, but we proved why their economical harm is recoverable and leaks abroad, but our harm to residents and sites is certain and stays local. The second issue is about who protects the destination itself and the sustainability of the tourism. We tell the over-tourism is the problem. We are not against tourism. We successfully proved that judge. The excessive people that visit the destinations are the problem. We care about actual tourism, and our speaker successfully proved that the environmental problems are very severe, and it helps the sustainability of the sites and the tourism. We went on long-term sustainability. We want people to enjoy diverse spread out sites, and have a healthy tourism so we can make it a long run. Judicious Judge, we believe that our speakers have successfully proved about our points about our harms to the visitors and the destinations are very small compared to the oppositions who keep on talking about economical problems, which are proved that are very low compared to our sites. We benefit both the residents and the long run of the destinations and the tourism. Therefore, please vote for us. Thank you.